Professor James Tabor, thank you so much for taking my questions and the time to elucidate some confusion, I think. It's obvious people are interpreting these things in various ways, and I wrote these questions as I read your book. Paul's ideas of resurrection for Jesus and the believers. You mentioned that Paul believed everyone would be transformed into a life-giving spirit rather than a flesh and blood body. It appears this was supposed to happen very soon. Wasn't the whole world universally going to get judged? It sounds like this failed and the movement evolved and cognitive dissonance set in. And then I added to this question, was physical resurrection a Jewish idea or Greek? There's a lot there to unravel, but maybe as we talk about what Paul thought the resurrection was, Jesus being the first fruit, or the firstborn, firstborn son, I think, or firstborn brother. Either way, Paul's vision or view of Jesus' resurrection, and then did he line up with the other apostles on how they thought Jesus rose? And then we can go from there maybe into...
Yeah, there's sort of three questions, so we'll try to separate them out. One would be, what did Paul think? The other would be, what did they think? And then the delay of the parousia, and what do you...
Right.
Well, let me start talking about Paul's view of resurrection of the dead, and then we could work back to the Gospels and Jesus. And in the book, I also do that. There's a
chronological
very
order.
Important chapter on resurrection where I go through this. But it's good to start with Paul. He's really our earliest witness, so that's important. It's not just I want to do Paul, but I think it's good to start with the earliest thing we have. And the earliest thing we have is in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Now, it's called the resurrection chapter by just about everybody, any Bible you open. I'm going to change the name here and now. It's not the resurrection chapter. It's the transformation of the cosmos chapter. It's telling you how God is going to save the entire cosmos and transform it into its newly created state, which the Hebrew Bible calls the new heavens and the new earth. Okay, Isaiah is the one who has that image. That's what the chapter is about. The dead come up incidentally because Paul thinks, let's call the coming the parousia. It means the arrival, the appearance. If an emperor's visiting a city, we have inscriptions where Emperor Augustus is coming. His parousia will be, on this date, his appearance. So Jesus is in heaven. He's seated at the right hand of God. He's in his glorified spiritual body. And Paul believes he's returning again. So the question is, when he returns again, and he handles this in 1 Thessalonians 4 as well, because people didn't have all this straight. We only get it from Paul. Well, that'll be great. We're going to rise up and meet the Lord, and we'll get transformed into these new bodies. And he uses the word metamorphosis, which we even know, from our butterfly, caterpillar to butterfly thing. And the question is, but the dead, did they get transformed as well? So that's how resurrection comes up. In other words, if somebody has died, have they lost out on this hope of transformation? But the chapter itself is about the transformation. And so he talks about we who are alive and remain, because he thinks he will be alive. So the dead are raised first. I'm putting 1 Thessalonians 4 and 1 Corinthians 15 together because they complement and totally harmonize, really. The dead are raised first, but they're raised incorruptible. As you're not looking for body parts. This is very important. You're not looking for a resuscitated corpse. It's very much like the book of Revelation. The sea gave up the dead, the sea, the ocean that were in it. You're not going and looking for what happened to that bottle. I think it got eaten by a shark. Oh no, forget all that. We're not talking about cremation, dust, ashes, corrupted bones, contents of ossuaries. That is not what he's talking about. We'll get to, I call that resuscitation more than resurrection, like Lazarus. Comes back in the same body, still mortal. No, Paul's talking about a transformation to a corruptible, lowly body, he calls it, to an incorruptible, glorious body. By the power, he says, that enables Jesus Christ to rule the whole cosmos. So this takes some major creative power that he thinks Jesus has. And so the living and the dead, as he says, in the moment, in the blink of an eye, at the last trumpet, Christ appears, the dead rise, the living rise also. They're transformed into this new state. And then he describes the body, because he says, well, people are going to ask, what kind of a body? What's it going to be? Now, this is the kicker here, because he says, I can't tell you what kind of a body. Do you see that he's not talking about resuscitation? Otherwise, he'd say, what do you mean, what kind of body? Didn't you know them? It'll be the guy you knew, maybe make him 30 years old, which is maybe the perfect age, in terms of aging and full maturity. Everybody will be 30 and beautiful. He didn't say that. He's, hey, when you plant a seed, do you know the plant, what it'll look like? If God plants us in the womb of the cosmos, in our purpose, and then he switches to sexual images, like in Romans 8, the whole cosmos is in labor pains. It's bringing forth these children of God. So the cosmos is a kind of a birth machine for the new creation of humanity, the new atoms, A-D-A-M-S. So the first Adam, he says, is of the dust. Mortal, he quotes Genesis 2:6. Back to the dust. Dust you are, to dust you return. That's not the second Adam. The second Adam, he says, is a life-giving spirit, which you quoted, a life-giving spirit. Now, there's a big argument about, but don't you need the physical to make the continuity with the spiritual? This is a question people ask because of the Gospels. See, they want to bring in the resuscitated corpse and then turn it into Paul. But I'm going to just stay with Paul. If I plant an acorn and an oak tree comes up, in process it came from the acorn. But is it anything like it? So he's basically saying I can't describe it. Why can't he describe it? I don't necessarily think Acts 9 and the two other accounts in Acts are exact accounts of what Paul saw at the resurrection. But I think they probably reflect, whoever wrote Acts is certainly sympathetic with Paul, that some kind of a blinding light experience. He says it's glory surpassing any glory on earth. And we get descriptions like in the book of Revelation, there's one description of Jesus. It says his face shines like the sun in its full strength. So that would be like, kind of an image.
Yeah.
So it's something just amazing. Now he claims he's ascended to paradise and seen these things that are unutterable. Now that can mean secrets, or it can mean there's no way I can tell you. It's just like mind-blowing.
I thought it was things that were unlawful. And
he said it's not lawful to reveal.
Yeah, it makes me think, is he taking a jab at the idea that it's not Torah? I couldn't tell you. I'd be,
Let's save that. Let's save that.
Okay.
The mysteries of the Torah and so forth.
Yeah.
But on resurrection, he's very clear. Now, the one thing in your question, though, about doesn't everybody get included and so forth, what he says is there are three stages. This is 1 Corinthians 15. Only place we have this. Christ, stage one, Jesus. In other words, we got one of these new sons of God. He's in heaven right now, sitting at the right hand of God. Paul thinks his people are going to be sitting at the right hand of God also. And they're going to rule the world. He says, don't you know the saints are going to judge the world? They're going to judge angels. Cosmic heavenly glorification. That's Paul's gospel. Forgiveness of sins, yes, that has to be. Living a new life, but what is the purpose? So that you can experience really why you were born. What were you born for? Were you born to be a worm that finally dies and goes to dust? Were you born to be one of these glorified sons of God, even above angels? This is his gospel. Imagine him preaching this to people. You're going to be above an angel someday. This is your cosmic destiny. Sounds like Mormonism or something,
It does.
And actually, that's where they get some of this.
It's definitely foreign compared to what you're used to hearing.
Yeah. We just say, hey, go to heaven. Go to heaven. Well, what do you mean you go to heaven? You take your liver and your kidneys up with you? I mean, come on. So anyway, if you leave we'll get to the Gospels. That's a separate topic. But if you take Paul, stage one, Christ. Stage two, those who are Christ at his appearance, parousia. Stage two. Okay, that's what he's describing. Stage three is an interim period where Christ conquers all rule, authority, and power, whatever that means for Paul, because he doesn't say. It sounds pretty cosmic, though. Like usually when he says rule, authority, and power, it's angelic things and demons and all kinds of things that Paul believes in Satan. He talks about Satan a lot. Satan hindered me, and I tried to do this, and Satan's buffeting me, and so forth. So Christ is conquering all that. And then he says, and the last enemy to be destroyed is death itself. And he quotes, he'll swallow up death. Oh, death, where is your sting? So that's stage 3. That's when all of humanity is somehow reconciled to God. I think he's probably a universalist because he says, and then God will be all things to all. Now, I guess you could have an annihilation view, like a certain residue of humanity just doesn't exist anymore. Or maybe they weren't raised. And, you know, Bart Ehrman did a new book on heaven and hell, and I'm so glad he did it, because this idea of Sheol for people, they think, I mean, Sheol is basically like nothing. Like if you go to Sheol, you're gone. Unless God brings you back in some new form, you're over.
Right.
But it sounds like he might think that God is going to redeem every last atom, we'd say, of the cosmos that has been subject to decay, he says. But in Romans 8, you got to put Romans 8, 1 Corinthians 4, 1 Thessalonians 4, 1 Corinthians 15. Romans 8, he says God subjected the cosmos, this is Genesis 1 stuff, to futility, like corruption, death, distress. In hope, he did it on purpose, so that it can birth the many children of God eventually. See? And Christ did. And if you ask, well, what's the proof of that? Boy, that's wild. He'd say, there's already one, and I saw him, and I talked to him. And if Christ is raised, how could you say that the others won't be raised? So this, what kind of a body, you can't read that question in Paul and then plug it back into the Gospels. Now, we can talk about the Gospels and what their accounts are. But again, if you take them chronologically, you're going to see something you might not have realized before. I know you've read my book and you've gone through that.
Thank you, Dr. Tabor.